Juzo Itami. On December 20th, 1997, one of Japan's most famous film directors was found dead on the pavement outside his 8-story office building in Tokyo's Azabu district. He had fallen from the roof. A typed suicide note sat on his desk, next to a photograph of his wife glowing on a computer screen. The police called it a suicide and closed the case. But the people closest to Juzo Itami never believed that for a second, and what came out years later suggested they might have been right. Itami was born Yoshihiro Ikuchi in Kyoto in 1933, and by the mid-1980s he had become something rare in Japanese cinema, a satirist with teeth. His debut feature, The Funeral, became a critical sensation in 1984. His follow-up, Tampopo, a comedy about the search for the perfect bowl of ramen, turned him into an international name. Then came A Taxing Woman, a sharp comedy about tax fraud that made him a household figure across Japan. The New York Times once called him possibly the only true social satirist working in movies at the time. He was fearless on screen, and that fearlessness eventually pointed him toward the one subject nobody in Japan was supposed to touch. In 1992, Itami released his 6th feature, a film called Minbo no Onna, which translates roughly to The Gentle Art of Japanese Extortion. The film mocked how the Yakuza shook down hotels and businesses. It played the gangsters not as dangerous anti-heroes, but as petty, bumbling parasites. Japanese audiences loved it. The Yakuza did not. 6 days after the film opened on May 16th, 5 members of the Goto Gumi, a Shizuoka-based faction within the powerful Yamaguchi Gumi syndicate run by a boss named Tadamasa Goto, ambushed Itami outside his Tokyo home. They slashed his face, neck, and shoulder with knives. He spent more than a week in the hospital. From his hospital bed, he wrote a public letter saying that the Yakuza must never be allowed to rob citizens of their freedom through violence and intimidation, and that this was the very message of his film. He told the press that the attackers had cut slowly, that they had taken their time, and that they could have ended his life if they wanted to. The attack triggered a national crackdown on organized crime and helped accelerate the passage of Japan's anti-gang legislation. A right-wing protester later slashed a cinema screen during a screening of the film. Itami turned his recovery into his next film, Daibyonin, and kept working. But 5 years later, on the evening of December 20th, 1997, he was dead at 64. The note referenced a tabloid story about to publish photographs of him with a younger woman. The weekly magazine Flash had warned Itami before publication, and he had told the editor that the woman was being interviewed for research on a planned film about office workers. The note said his death was the only way to prove his innocence, and called his wife, the actress Nobuko Miyamoto, the best wife, mother, and actress in Japan. On paper, it looked like a man who could not bear the shame of a scandal. But friends and family pointed out something the police apparently did not weigh heavily enough. Itami had written published essays describing extramarital affairs as a natural part of life. He had mocked shame suicides in his own films. The clothes he was wearing that night were uncharacteristically sloppy, and reports suggested he had been drinking. The note was typed on a word processor, not handwritten. One contemporary press account captured the dissonance perfectly, noting how strange it was that a man who had spent his career using humor to expose what he called the dark side of the Japanese condition would resort to a grimly conventional response to public embarrassment. Then, more than a decade later, a detail surfaced that reframed everything. In 2008, the American crime reporter Jake Adelstein published an account from a former member of the Goto Gumi who claimed the death was not a suicide at all. According to this unnamed source, operatives had dragged Itami to the rooftop, put a gun in his face, and given him a choice: jump, or they would shoot. He jumped. He did not survive. The source said Itami had been developing a screenplay exposing financial connections between the Goto-gumi and the Buddhist organization Soka Gakkai, and that this gave Tadamasa Goto a fresh motive to silence him permanently. Goto himself never confessed to the 1997 killing, but in his best-selling 2010 memoir, which sold more than 225,000 copies, he wrote about the 1992 face-slashing with something close to pride, saying that while he had not personally given the order, he was proud of the subordinate who carried it out. Goto spent his final years as an ordained Buddhist priest in Cambodia and died on February 8, 2026, never having faced charges in connection with Itami's death. As for Nobuko Miyamoto, she lived under round-the-clock police protection for roughly 20 years after her husband died. In 2007, she opened the Juzo Itami Memorial Museum in Matsuyama, and she has stated publicly, more than once, that her husband would never have taken his own life over a tabloid story. Itami's brother-in-law, the Nobel Prize-winning novelist Kenzaburo Oe, later fictionalized the death in his 2000 novel The Changeling. Officially, Juzo Itami's death remains a suicide. Unofficially, the murder theory rests on a single anonymous source filtered through one foreign reporter, combined with a list of circumstantial oddities that have never been satisfactorily explained. That tension between the official record and what the people who knew him believe is the reason this case refuses to stay closed. And if a director who mocked the Yakuza in a movie paid for it with 5 knife wounds to the face, the question hanging over the next case is what happens when the Yakuza turns its violence not outward, but inward against an entire family. The Kitamura family. In September 2004, a family of 4 in the small city of Omuta, Fukuoka Prefecture, committed a crime so extreme that every single one of them was sentenced to death. Not one member, not 2. All 4. It remains the only case in modern Japanese legal history where an entire nuclear family received the death penalty and had every sentence confirmed by the Supreme Court. The family was the Kitamuras. The father, Jitsuo, was 60 years old and the boss of the Kitamura Gumi, a small Yakuza outfit affiliated with the Dojin-kai syndicate. The mother, Mami, was 45, and according to prosecutors, the ringleader of what was about to happen. The 2 sons, Takashi and Takahiro, were 23 and 20, and both were former sumo wrestlers. Takashi had competed under the ring name Kyokuryujin. Takahiro had fought as Mikazan, 2 ex-sumo wrestlers, a gang boss and his wife. That was the killing unit. The target was a woman named Sayoko Takami, 58, an unlicensed moneylender. Mami had borrowed heavily from Sayoko, and by the fall of 2004, the family owed roughly 66 million yen. They could not make their gang's monthly tribute payments, and the debt was strangling them. Prosecutors later established that Mami resented Sayoko for increasingly looking down on her, and that the family collectively decided to rob and murder her to erase the debt entirely. Both sons had washed out of professional sumo and drifted into the family's criminal orbit. Takahiro, the younger, was the one prosecutors identified as the hands-on killer of all 4 victims. He was 20 years old when the plan was set in motion. On September 16, 2004, the 2 brothers lured Sayoko's youngest son, who was 15, to the Umaoki Bridge over the Suwa River. The harm inflicted on him was fatal. His body was left in the river. 2 days later, on September 18th, the family struck again. Mommy invited Sayoko to a meal laced with sleeping pills and then strangled her. When Sayoko's eldest son, Tatsuyuki, 18, and his 17-year-old friend arrived at the scene, they were shot. The three bodies were loaded into Sayoko's car, a Suzuki Wagon R, and the vehicle was driven off the Umaoki Bridge into the Suwa River. According to Takahiro's own prison writings, the family went grocery shopping afterward, while still spattered with blood. On September 21st, the body of the 15-year-old surfaced in the river. Police arrested Mommy the following day. She confessed and led investigators to the rest of the family. That evening, the submerged car was pulled from the water with 3 bodies inside. Police assembled a 92-officer task force, formally tasked with investigating the serial murder and body dumping of 4 persons within Omuta City. And somehow, it gets worse. During his arrest, Jitsuo fired a handgun inside the Omuta police station in a failed attempt to take his own life. A separate firearms charge was added. On November 13, 2004, Takashi briefly escaped custody while being transferred at the Kurume branch of the Fukuoka prosecutor's office. It also emerged that Takashi had a prior conviction from the year 2000 for beating an 18-year-old with 6 accomplices using a wooden sword and drowning him in an irrigation canal. This was not his first killing. The courtroom scenes were barely controlled. The brothers fought verbally during proceedings. Takashi lunged at Takahiro and was physically ejected from the room. After delivering what was supposed to be an apology to the victim's surviving relatives, Takahiro turned to them and snarled what translates roughly as, "Don't mess with me." On October 17, 2006, the Fukuoka District Court's Kurume branch, under presiding Judge Masayoshi Takahara, sentenced Mommy and Takahiro to death. On February 28, 2007, the same court sentenced Jitsuo and Takashi to death. The Fukuoka High Court, under presiding Judge Katsuhiko Masaki, upheld all 4 sentences. When Takahiro's death sentence was affirmed on December 25, 2007, he turned to the packed courtroom and shouted, "Merry Christmas." That's not a typo, by the way. In 2010, investigative journalist Tomohiko Suzuki published a 200-page handwritten prison memoir he had received from Takahiro. In it, Takahiro described what he called the thrill of performing what he saw as a godlike act, separating life from death, and said that once you have experienced it, you cannot stop. Yet when Suzuki visited him in person, he found Takahiro polite and deferential, bowing deeply at every meeting. Suzuki later described the gap between the man in the letters and the man at the table as one of the most unsettling things he had encountered in decades of covering organized crime. The memoir was later adapted into a feature film, and a paperback reissue titled Everyone on Death Row was published in 2017. Its original title translates to My Whole Family is on Death Row. The Supreme Court finalized all 4 death sentences in October 2011. The first petty bench, with Justice Isamu Shiraki presiding, wrote that the criminal responsibility was extremely grave and that they had no choice but to affirm the sentence of death. It is the only case in Japanese legal history where the Supreme Court confirmed the death penalty for every member of a single family. On March 7, 2025, the Ministry of Justice announced that Jitsuo Kitamura, 81, had died of pneumonia while still on death row at Fukuoka Detention Center. The other 3 remain in their cells, awaiting execution. The Kitamura case was a family that killed together, was sentenced together, and now waits together on death row. But in the world of the Yakuza, the ripple effects of a single killing can stretch far beyond one family one city, or even one generation. In 1997, one afternoon in a Kobe hotel lounge proved exactly that. Masaru Takumi. At around 3:20 in the afternoon on August 28, 1997, four men in dark suits and baseball caps walked into the fourth-floor lounge of the new Kobe Oriental Hotel in central Kobe. They moved toward a table where one of the most powerful men in Japanese organized crime was having lunch with two other senior syndicate figures, including a supreme advisor named Saizo Kishimoto. Within seconds, one of the gunmen opened fire. The target was hit 7 times. He raised his left hand in self-defense and tried to stand before collapsing. He was pronounced dead at a nearby hospital about an hour later, and the power vacuum his death created would destabilize the largest criminal organization on Earth for nearly 2 decades. Masaru Takumi, born June 22, 1936, was the Wakagashira of the Yamaguchi Gumi. In plain terms, that made him the number 2 man and chief financial officer of the most powerful Yakuza syndicate in Japan, serving directly under 5th-generation boss Yoshinori Watanabe. He ran his own faction of roughly 1,000 men called the Takumi Gumi, was nicknamed the man who never sleeps, and was widely considered the favorite to succeed Watanabe as supreme boss. His influence, according to multiple analysts of Japanese organized crime, had grown so large that it overshadowed even the man above him. The men who killed him were from the Nakano-kai, a renegade affiliate based in Osaka and led by a deputy underboss named Taro Nakano. The motive was internal politics at the deadliest possible scale. Takumi had ordered the Nakano-kai to stand down in a brutal turf war against a rival faction called the Aizu Kotetsu-kai. Nakano took that order as a personal betrayal, especially because the Aizu Kotetsu had previously tried to kill him, so he ordered a hit on the second most powerful Yakuza boss in the country. The operation was organized by a Nakano-kai executive named Harutoshi Zaitsu, who led the 4-man team into the hotel lounge. A gunman named Kyoteru Toriabara fired the shots. As the attack unfolded, Zaitsu was overheard yelling at a lagging member of the team to hurry up. A stray bullet struck a 69-year-old dentist named Hiroshi Hirai, who was seated at the next table having a quiet lunch. Hirai died 6 days later. That innocent civilian death would prove catastrophic for the shooters and their entire faction. You'd think someone would have said something. Nobody did. Not publicly, anyway. Kishimoto and the 3rd executive at Takumi's table were uninjured, just feet from the gunfire, but neither would testify. Behind the scenes, though, the Yamaguchi Gumi's retaliation was swift and ruthless. Despite an official internal ban on revenge killings, members of the Nakano-kai began turning up dead across Japan. The Nakano-kai was formally disbanded in disgrace by the Yamaguchi Gumi leadership. By 2002, the faction's membership had collapsed from a peak in the thousands to roughly 170. Many of the original conspirators were assassinated in revenge attacks that were never officially linked to the parent syndicate, but that everyone in the underworld understood. The senior figure who had greenlit the assassination, a man named Kazutoshi Yoshino, aged 45, was found dead in a Seoul apartment in July 1998. Korean authorities ruled it a stroke. Japanese police suspected he had been poisoned. The 2 primary shooters vanished. Toriabara, the triggerman, was a severe diabetic, and his health deteriorated badly while on the run. He developed gangrene. Zaitsu later told a court that he had changed Toriabara's bandages every day and fed him nutritional drinks because they could no longer risk being identified at hospitals. For 16 years, the 2 men lived as ghosts, moving between safe houses, unable to seek medical care, unable to surface. Then, On June 5, 2013, police finally caught up with Zaitsu outside an apartment near the Seibu-Shinjuku train line in Sayama, Saitama Prefecture. He was 56 years old. When officers approached, he told them the last 3 years had been very difficult and that he honestly felt a sense of relief at being arrested. On March 14, 2014, the Kobe District Court sentenced him to life in prison. In his final statement before sentencing, he said it was not possible to disobey an order from the top. 2 of the original 4 gunmen were still officially listed as fugitives in court documents as of 2005. And no, I'm not making that up. A man spent 16 years running, nursing a dying accomplice in hiding, and when the police finally caught him, his defense was that he had simply followed orders. But the most significant consequence of Takumi's assassination had nothing to do with the gunmen or their fate. With Takumi dead, the Yamaguchi-gumi could not agree on who should replace him as Wakagashira. The number 2 position in the world's most powerful crime syndicate sat vacant for 8 years. 8 years without a successor. The vacuum paralyzed the organization's internal politics and created rival power centers that had never existed before. When the position was finally filled in 2005, the new supreme boss, Kenichi Shinoda, also known by the gangster name Shinobu Tsukasa, elevated an ally named Kiyoshi Takayama from Nagoya to the Wakagashira slot. This was a deliberate Nagoya-based Kudo-kai takeover of an organization that had been traditionally run out of the Kansai region. The old guard in Kobe saw it as a hostile act. That shift created a factional rift so deep that in 2015, the Yamaguchi-gumi formally split in 2, spawning a rival organization called the Kobe Yamaguchi-gumi. The schism triggered a wave of low-level violence and police crackdowns across Western Japan that lasted years. 1 lunch in a Kobe hotel, 7 bullets, and the largest criminal syndicate in the world spent the next 2 decades tearing itself apart because of it. Every case so far has involved Yakuza killing other Yakuza, or Yakuza settling scores within their own world. But what happens when a gangster with a grudge decides to take out someone who has nothing to do with organized crime at all? Someone like, say, a sitting mayor? Mayor Itoh. On the evening of April 17, 2007, the mayor of Nagasaki stepped out of his campaign car in front of JR Nagasaki Station. He was running for his 4th term. He had spent more than a decade as one of the most prominent anti-nuclear voices on the planet. 15 seconds later, he was lying face down on the pavement with 2 bullets in his back, shot at point-blank range by a low-ranking Yakuza member whose grudge against the city had started with a pothole. Mayor Itoh was born Kazunaga Itoh on August 23, 1945, just 8 days after Japan's formal surrender, and barely 2 weeks after the atomic bomb had leveled his city. He grew up in the shadow of the bomb and spent his career making sure the world never forgot what it had done. He became Nagasaki's first post-war-born mayor in 1995 and turned the office into a platform for nuclear disarmament that reached far beyond Japan. In November of that same year, he stood before the International Court of Justice in The Hague and argued that the use of nuclear weapons violates international law. He served as vice president of Mayors for Peace, a global network of more than 1,600 mayors campaigning for the abolition of nuclear weapons. At the 60th anniversary of the Nagasaki bombing in 2005, Itoh addressed the United States directly. He acknowledged American grief and anxiety over the September 11th attacks, but asked whether a government policy of maintaining 10,000 nuclear warheads truly enhanced anyone's security. It was the kind of statement that made him internationally respected, and apparently locally vulnerable. The man who killed him was Tetsuya Shiru, 59, a member of the Suishin-kai, a small Nagasaki-based affiliate of the Yamaguchi-gumi. Shiru's grudge had nothing to do with politics, nuclear weapons, or ideology. In 2003, he had driven a car connected to the Yamaguchi-gumi into a hole at a city public works site. His insurance company denied the claim. The city refused to compensate him. Shiru sued and lost. He even mailed a letter detailing his grievance to TV Asahi before the shooting. Nobody responded. A construction firm linked to the Suishin-kai had also been denied a city contract. By February 2007, when Itoh announced he would seek a fourth term, Shiru decided to kill him to prevent his re-election. A pothole, a denied insurance claim, and a rejected construction bid. In the simplest possible terms, that is what it took to end the life of a man who had stood at The Hague, arguing for the future of civilization. At approximately 7:50 in the evening on April 17th, Shiru approached Itoh from behind as he exited his campaign vehicle and fired 2 rounds from a Smith & Wesson Model 36 revolver into his back. After Itoh collapsed, Shiru fired again into him while he was on the ground. Bystanders and campaign staff tackled Shiru and pinned him down. Police later found 20 additional bullets on his person. Shiru reportedly told officers he had planned to take his own life after the shooting, but never got the chance. Itoh arrived at Nagasaki University Hospital in cardiac arrest. Surgeons placed him on heart-lung bypass and spent 4 hours trying to stop the massive internal bleeding. He was pronounced dead at approximately 2:28 in the morning on April 18, 2007. The reaction was immediate and global. The United Nations Secretary-General called Itoh a champion of peace for a world where nuclear war would never happen again. Japan's Prime Minister called the killing unforgivable. It was the second shooting of a Nagasaki mayor in 17 years. Itoh's predecessor, Hitoshi Motoshima, had been shot and wounded in 1990 by a right-wing extremist, after publicly stating that Emperor Hirohito bore responsibility for the war. The Suishin-kai's offices were raided, and within days the gang announced it was voluntarily disbanding. The Yamaguchi-gumi publicly disavowed the killing. The snap election that followed was one of the closest in Japanese history. Itoh's son-in-law, Makoto Yoku, and city official Tomihisa Taue both filed for the race. Taue won by just 953 votes. Shiru's trial opened on January 22, 2008. On May 26, 2008, presiding Judge Yoshimichi Matsuo sentenced him to death, declaring that the act was extremely outrageous and heinous, and that it had infringed on the people's right to vote and destabilized democracy from its roots. Prosecutors had called it electoral terrorism, an act that stifled debate and shook the core of freedom and democracy. And then the Fukuoka High Court did something that stunned the country. On September 29, 2009, they overturned the death sentence and re-sentenced Shiru to life imprisonment. The panel acknowledged that the crime had destabilized democracy at its roots, but wrote that they could not help but hesitate about choosing the death penalty, reasoning that the primary motive was a personal grudge, not a political assassination, and that disrupting the election had not been the intent. They applied the 1983 Supreme Court criteria for capital sentencing and concluded the case did not meet the threshold. The Supreme Court let the commutation stand. Shiru, who suffered from diabetes and cerebral thrombosis, died at the Osaka Medical Prison on January 22, 2020, at the age of 72. He never expressed public remorse. A mayor who challenged nuclear superpowers, killed over a pothole. A death sentence overturned, because the court decided the motive was too petty to warrant the ultimate punishment. The case remains the clearest modern example in Japanese law of a trivial private grudge escalating to public political assassination, and of the deep reluctance in Japanese courts to impose death for a single victim, even when that victim is an elected mayor. But every case so far has shared one thing in common. The violence, whether aimed at filmmakers, families, rival bosses, or mayors, came from individual members or small factions acting on their own grudges or orders. What nobody had ever seen in Japan was a Yakuza supreme boss personally orchestrating a campaign of violence against ordinary civilians, one after another, over a period of years, until Satoru Nomura came along. If you're liking this video and you're not subscribed yet, now's the time. We drop new cases every day. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Satoru Nomura. In August 2021, a 74-year-old Yakuza boss stood in a Fukuoka courtroom and became the first active crime syndicate leader in modern Japanese history to be sentenced to death by hanging. When the judge finished reading the verdict, the old man looked directly at him and said, "I asked for a fair judgment, and you will regret this for the rest of your life." His second-in-command then added, directed at the same judge, "It's a good thing you'll be working in Tokyo." That remark was widely interpreted as a death threat. The case that put them there did not involve rival gangs, drug empires, or turf wars. It involved a fisherman, a retired police officer, a nurse, and a dentist. Satoru Nomura, born in 1946, was the fifth president of the Kudo-kai, a Yakuza syndicate based in Kitakyushu that had earned a distinction no other criminal organization in Japan has ever received. In 2012, the National Police Agency formally designated the Kudo-kai as a specified dangerous designated Boryokudan, a label created specifically for groups whose violence is so extreme it triggers enhanced legal penalties. It is the only gang in the country to carry that designation. Nomura was small, about 5'4", carried a wooden sword on his person, and was known in the underworld by the nickname Nomura the Stick. At his peak in 2008, he commanded roughly 1,200 men. By his arrest in 2014, that number had dropped to about 400. What separated Nomura from every other Yakuza boss in Japan was his choice of targets. Between 1998 and 2014, the Kudo-kai under Nomura and his deputy Fumio Tanue carried out a series of attacks not against rival syndicates, but against ordinary citizens and public servants who had crossed them or simply gotten in the way. The first target was Kunihiro Kajiwara, 70, a former chairman of the local fisheries cooperative in Kitakyushu. The Kudo-kai had been pressuring him to support a marine reclamation project in which the gang had a financial stake. Kajiwara refused. On February 18, 1998, he was shot 4 times at point-blank range, once in the head, on a street outside a cabaret club. He died on the spot. 2 low-level Kudo-kai gunmen were convicted in 2002, but it took police another 12 years to build a case connecting the killing to Nomura himself. Kajiwara's younger brother, Tadayoshi Ueno, who succeeded him as cooperative chairman, was himself shot dead near his home in December 2013. That killing remains officially unsolved, but is widely attributed to the Kudo-kai. In April 2012, a retired Fukuoka prefectural police captain, who had spent his career investigating the Kudo-kai, was shot multiple times in the leg and torso on a Kitakyushu street. He survived with serious injuries. Then came the attack that exposed the most about who Nomura really was. In January 2013, A 45-year-old nurse at a Kitakyushu cosmetic surgery clinic was attacked from behind by a Kudo-kai member while walking home through Fukuoka City at around 7 in the evening. She was stabbed in the head, neck, and chest, and survived only by luck. The motive, as prosecutors laid it out at trial, was this. In August 2012, Nomura had undergone a cosmetic procedure at the clinic where she worked. He experienced post-operative pain and complications and felt the nurse had been disrespectful during his treatment. Testimony at trial indicated she had told him that the procedure could not possibly hurt as much as getting one of his Yakuza tattoos. A Yakuza boss ordered a woman stabbed nearly to death because he felt disrespected after an elective surgery. 2 days after the stabbing, Nomura returned to the same clinic for a follow-up visit and told the staff, without naming the nurse, that if a person causes damage, well, some things cannot be helped. The final documented attack came in May 2014, when a 28-year-old dentist, who was a relative of the Kajiwara family that had defied the gang in 1998, was stabbed in the leg and stomach in a parking lot on his way to work. Police launched what they called Operation Summit in September 2014. Nomura was arrested at his home in Kitakyushu on September 11th for the 1998 Kajiwara murder. Over the following months, he was rearrested for the nurse attack, the dentist attack, tax evasion, and the retired officer shooting. His trial opened at the Fukuoka District Court on January 14, 2021. On August 24, 2021, presiding Judge Ben Adachi convicted Nomura on 1 count of murder and 3 counts of attempted murder and sentenced him to death by hanging. The court reasoned that the Kudo-kai's strict military chain of command made it impossible for 4 coordinated attacks on civilians to occur without Nomura's authorization, even without direct documentary proof linking him to specific orders. It was a landmark application of organizational command responsibility to a Yakuza boss, and anti-gang lawyers called it a verdict that puts the entire Yakuza system on notice. Tanue, 65, received life imprisonment. The courtroom threats that followed were captured by multiple Japanese news outlets. Nomura told the judge he had asked for a fair judgment and that the judge would regret this decision for the rest of his life. Tanue added that it was a good thing the judge would be transferring to Tokyo, a remark understood as a direct threat, given the precedent of the Aum Shinrikyo cult attacking judges with sarin gas in the city of Matsumoto in 1994. During the trial, Kudo-kai members were also arrested for intimidating a prosecution witness. And no, I'm not making that up. A convicted boss, seconds after receiving a death sentence, looked the judge in the eye and told him he would regret it forever. On March 12, 2024, the Fukuoka High Court overturned Nomura's death sentence and commuted it to life imprisonment. Presiding Judge Futoshi Ichikawa acquitted Nomura of the 1998 Kajiwara murder, writing that the lower court's finding of conspiracy could not be acknowledged in light of the rules of logic and experience. The court upheld his convictions for the 3 attempted murders. Nomura, 77, reportedly showed no expression as the ruling was read. Tanue's life sentence was affirmed. The prosecution has appealed, and the case now sits before the Supreme Court. As of today, Satoru Nomura is alive in a Japanese prison, his final sentence undecided. The question of whether a Yakuza boss can be held legally responsible for the violence his organization carries out, even without a paper trail connecting him to specific orders, remains open. The Supreme Court has not yet ruled. 5 cases, 5 different faces of the same machine, from staged suicides to family death sentences, from hotel assassinations to mayors killed over potholes, to a boss who ordered a nurse stabbed because she felt disrespected. The Yakuza's reach touches everything, and the cases that surface are only the ones the courts manage to catch. Thanks for watching. Click here for the next video.